Normally I like to start off my talks with some sort of a joke, something funny, but I think the title kind of does that for me. Like you said, I'm Josh Sokol. I'm the Information Security Program owner over at National Instruments. My motivations for this talk. So first of all, I've seen several risk management talks in the past, and most of them were pretty boring, and that's probably saying the best thing about them. A lot of people have come to me in the past. Let me move back here so my mic doesn't echo. A lot of people have come to me in the past, and they've said, I've been talking to my management, and they just won't listen to me. They don't listen to what I have to say. And so, I wanted to put together a talk that kind of talked about how do you talk to management? How do you use security tools to actually convince them to do things like security projects? I've had people come to me and say, well, I find all my vulnerabilities by scanning the environment and by using Expos or whatever, and they say my peers, they won't talk to me, they won't tell me the problems, so I have to go and try and find them. Proper risk management is about using risk, and risk is something we're going to talk a lot about today, and using risk to drive organizational improvement. We're taking these risks and we're using them to feed back to the business and actually gain them to prioritize projects based on those risks. This may just be me, but I feel like risk management can actually be interesting and extremely valuable. So let's start and kind of talk about personal risk management, because I think this kind of draws risk management back to something that we're all very familiar with. In personal risk management, you're doing this already. You're doing this in your everyday life. So take my house, right? I have a nice house. I have nice things in my house, and I don't want those things to get stolen, or I don't want those things to get destroyed in a fire. So I've made a personal risk assessment. I've looked at those things, I've looked at my property, and I've said, what are the things that I'm worried about? What are the risks to me? And then, based on those risks, I plan mitigations. So I may say, well, for the most part, I live in a decent neighborhood, nobody's going to break in, I don't need bars on my windows. That's a decision that I made, and I've accepted that. But I do feel like there's some chance that somebody might want to steal my kids' Christmas presents or my nice TV, right? So in order to prevent that, I've planned mitigations. I've put things like an alarm system on there. If you break a window, an alarm goes off. If you open my front door, an alarm goes off. And those are personal risk management decisions that I've made in order to mitigate those risks. Now, enterprise risk management really isn't any different. We're looking at those risks, but on an enterprise level. So real quick, show of hands, who here has an existing risk management program? Couple, okay. Who is interested in starting a risk management program? Couple more. So for those who didn't raise your hands, why are you here? What we're talking about here is risk management. We're trying to figure out for you guys, how do we make risk management work? So risk management is about threats and consequences. So when we look at this chart here, we look at different types of risk. And risk can be all over the board. It can be financial risk. It could be reputational damage, risk around reputation damage. And each of these risks have different consequences at different levels, depending on what happens. So take the financial loss, for example. Our low consequence there is that some sort of unit manager could contain the anticipated loss in our operational budget. That's pretty low impact there. But if we look at the high consequence, it says recovery from the anticipated loss will be handled by the CEO and board as a special item. That's pretty big when the board has to get involved in something going on in your company. Other types of threats and consequences, regulatory noncompliance. What happens if I'm not PCI compliant or SOX compliant? Business interruptions, downtimes, things like that. Even safety hazards. If somebody slips and falls on a puddle on the floor that happens because our roof is leaking, that's a risk. And the risk is if somebody slips and falls, we could get sued. That person could get hurt, right? So we need to look at all these different risk types, and we need to figure out what's the consequences. Not only do we have to figure out what the consequences are, but we have to figure out what do we want to do with that. In an ideal world, in an ideal scenario, risk management is a prioritization process. We look at the risk with the greatest loss or impact and the greatest probability or likelihood of occurring. And we like to handle the ones that have the highest of both first and go down the list. So lower probability of occurrence, lower loss, they all get handled in descending order. So on this chart up here, you can see that we have risk number 1 has an extreme impact and an almost certain likelihood. That's something that's probably going to happen, and when it happens, it's going to be really, really bad for us. What that means from a risk perspective is that's probably the first thing that we want to focus on. Now, there is another component that goes into here, which is level of effort, right? You know, if it takes a lot of time, a lot of money to fix that risk, and our potential damage is less than the cost to fix it, well, you know, maybe we don't handle that. But in general, this is how we want to handle our risks, from the top down. There's lots of different methodologies out there in order to do risk management. NIST 800-30 is the framework from the federal government. That's what all the agencies, the federal agencies and whatnot are using. There's an ISO framework. There's all sorts of different stuff. But the problem here is that these are somebody else's vision of what risk management should be. This is somebody else telling you how you should perform risk management. And that's fine if the government telling a state agency what they need to do, but for the rest of us, we live in the real world. We work for other companies, and we don't want the government telling us this is what you have to do. We want to do risk management that's best for our companies. So at best, these should be a guideline. They give you examples of what other people are doing. At worst, they make risk management look overly complicated, make it really difficult to get started. When I first started looking into risk management for National Instruments, I started looking at these frameworks and I went, oh my God, I have to do this and calculate this and put this in. It's ridiculous. So really risk management is about figuring out what's right for you, what's right for your company. It doesn't have to be that complicated. When we define risk, we say risk is the potential that a chosen action or activity, including the choice of inaction, will lead to a loss or some sort of an undesirable outcome. Risk can apply to all sorts of things. It could be economic, health, safety, and environmental, IT and InfoSec, insurance, business and management, finance, security, right? It runs across the board. And the interesting thing is, when I first got started in risk management, I actually started looking at, they call them GRC tools, governance, risk, and compliance. And I started talking to one of the major vendors, and I actually got a quote for it. And they quoted me $500,000 for a GRC tool for my company. And I went, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous, $500,000. I was like, but I need it. So I put it in my budget, and my management laughed at me. They were like, $500,000, your security program is pretty close to zero right now. You are not getting $500,000 for a GRC. So I got wise. I was like, all right, well, what if I go to all these different other guys here, and I start talking to them? And maybe I take that $500,000 and I split it up between 10 other groups at National Instruments. They're all doing risk-based decisions, and now we're paying $50,000 a piece. Well, when we got to the end of the presentation, I said, who likes this? Who wants this tool? Everybody raised their hands, and I said, okay, it's going to be $50,000 from you and $50,000 from you. And they were like, you want us to pay for this thing? No way. So risk can apply to all sorts of different stuff. I'll continue that story in a sec. All right, risk formula. So risk usually takes in two different pieces when we're calculating it. The first is likelihood. Likelihood is just the probability of something occurring. What is the likelihood of something happening? The second is impact, which is the expected loss if that event occurs. And we can use different values for that, and it's going to be different depending on your company or what you guys are doing. Ooh. It's going to be different. This thing's going up. So, it's going to be different. Now what we do is we take that risk formula. We take those two pieces, the probability, the likelihood of it happening, and the impact if it does happen, and we multiply those two values together. And what we get with that is the risk. So what you see on the bottom is the chart. This thing's going out.
Somebody's coming back.
Yeah, we'll do this. Test. All right. So what you see on the bottom is a chart. And the chart is really just a simple calculation. It's taking the risk or the likelihood on one side, the impact on the other side, and it's calculating the two of them together. It's taking a 1 through 5 scale on one, 1 through 5 scale on the other, multiplying those two values out, and then you get this kind of nice little chart. And when you look at it's that the probability thing, the ideal scenario that we were talking about, where up here on the top, this is our high level risk. The orange stuff here, that's our medium risk. The yellow stuff here, that's our low-level risk. And then the white stuff is insignificant. And it's okay to have insignificant risks. It's okay to say, I don't really care about this stuff. I'm going to document it. I'm going to say that there's a risk here. But if it, you know, the likelihood of it happening and the impact if it does happen is so low, I don't even need to waste cycles on this. That's okay. Now, make your risk formula fit you. I pulled it off. I turned it off. Went wireless. Make your risk formula fit you. So what I mean by this is your formula can and will change. So in this case, what I've done is I've taken that risk equals likelihood times impact. I've actually added an impact to it. That actually weights the formula so that I consider impact to be more important than likelihood. And so you'll see by the chart, it skews a little bit more towards that impact, right? Now likewise, we can make it plus likelihood. And when we do that, we skew it the other way. We skew it more towards the likelihood. So what you should be doing when you're going through and performing risk management is you should be looking at this. You should be modifying your formula, tweaking those values, and seeing what works best for you. What of this, what do you consider to be high-level risk? What do you consider to be medium risk, low-level risk? And seeing if you can get that formula to kind of fit you guys. Now you can also do double-weighted impact, double-weighted likelihood. You can tweak this formula however you want. The idea here is that you should be flexible. Risk management needs to be custom fit for your organization, and your formula needs to reflect that. Your formula can and likely will change, and wherever you're tracking risk, doesn't matter if it's in a GRC tool or in an Excel doc or whatever, it should be able to dynamically update risk based on that new formula. So you should basically be able to plug and play a new formula and have it automatically update all that stuff. If it can't do that, you got problems, right? What this usually means is Word sucks, right? Because Word doesn't do all those dynamically updating without, special, hotkeys and things like that. No Excel documents. It can do some formula stuff, but when you're trying to calculate risks on the fly and have it update other stuff, it gets really complicated very quickly. I think Victoria can tell you about that. Other stack formats, text files and things like that, become really cumbersome when you're trying to do risk management. Now, let's talk about convincing your management. This is one of the hardest things to do as a security practitioner. And the reason being is as security practitioners, when we're talking about risk, well, a lot of us don't talk about risk, and that in and of itself is a problem. But when you're talking to management, you need to communicate in the way that management understands. You need to speak risk. Management speaks risk. Businesses make decisions on what they're going to invest in, what tools they're going to purchase, whether we're going to acquire that company over there. Those are all risk-based decisions. So as security practitioners, we need to make sure that we are speaking the same language that management is speaking internally. This means we're not talking CVEs, we're not talking attack vectors, we're not talking threat trees. We are speaking risk. Your responsibility as a security professional, I think this is another area where we fall down. Your responsibility as a security professional is to collect and convey risk. It is not to accept risk. And this is where we all get very tied up around the axle. We feel like, hey, there's a problem here. We should fix this. We have to fix this. If we don't fix this, I'm going to lose my job, right? It's not like that. As security professionals, we need to understand that our job is to figure out what the problems are out there and then make sure management knows about that and that they can say, yes, I know about this. Yes, I want to do something about that. Yes, I accept this. So we need to give management visibility and make them have accountability, right? So as security practitioners, we are collecting and conveying. We are not accepting the risk, and that's very, very important. Management, their responsibility is to evaluate how to respond to that risk. So they make the decision, do we accept this? Do we buy insurance for it? Or do we reduce the risk, right, through some sort of mitigation? And if you do a good job of guiding management through the risk analysis, then the end result is something that they can actually use. It's a list of priorities that you can then feed directly back into projects, and you can say, hey, if we do this disaster recovery project over here, we fix this disaster recovery issue by the risk that was submitted by the Unix team, and this one by the network team, and this one by the Windows team, we fix a whole bunch of risks in our environment through this one project, right? So if we're doing risk management effectively, management actually sees direct result from that, and they're actually, you are providing value add back to the business. Now, risk management will also fail if you don't have the support of your peers. The reason being is that management can only be proactive in addressing risk if they know that those risks exist. So somehow you have to find out what those risks are. This means that you need to get your peers bought in on the fact that risk management is something that is of value to them. And the way that you do that is you tell them, if the risk is undocumented, if you carry this inside you, if that's the skeleton in your closet, that means that you shoulder the responsibility of this risk. If it happens and you didn't tell anybody about it, you're the one who gets in trouble. But if this risk is documented, if it's something we put into our system, I will personally help you so that management will see that risk. They will know that's there. Not only that, but management will accept that risk. Well, what this means is that they acknowledge that the risk exists, and any action or inaction, if they say, well, we're not going to do anything, we don't have the money, whatever, it's now on their shoulders. So security practitioners sleep better at night, management sleeps better at night because they know about these things that they didn't know about before, and your peers sleep better at night. Risk management helps everybody. Now, determining risk, there's lots of different ways that we can determine risk. And the first thing is what I just said. If you can convince your peers that documenting risk is something of value to them, if it's CYOA for them, then you will have more risk than you know what to do with, right? You start telling them, hey, if you give me some risk, if you tell me about the problems in your environment, I'll help you make them go away, and I will make sure that management sees these things. They're like, okay, here's the stuff. Here, take them all, right? I don't want to wear that burden on my shoulders. Now, there's other ways to get risk too, and if unfortunately you can't convince your peers, some of these others are what you're going to end up doing. Network vulnerability scanners, application vulnerability scanners, mailing lists, blogs, code reviews. Twitter is actually a great place. Follow a lot of security practitioners. You'll learn about the newest O-days and things like that before anybody else does. In any case, we need to be able to determine what the risks are in our environment. When you're evaluating the risk, so now you know that the risk is there, the first question you ask yourself is the risk acceptable? Is the likelihood or impact low enough that I'm willing to just accept the consequences if it happens? And security practitioners don't really like to hear this option, right? We like to feel like every security problem is extremely important and has to get fixed. But the unfortunate fact is some risks, they're just not worth handling. If it comes true, it might affect that little application over there. It might take down that server over there. But in the big picture, it's not going to be that bad. So as security practitioners, we need to do a better job of not going out and saying the sky is falling, the sky is falling. We have to understand that different issues have different levels of risk. And based on those different levels of risk, we need to take different types of actions. So the second question we ask when evaluating the risk is the risk transferable? And the idea here is, can I purchase some sort of insurance or some other measure that transfers the impact of the risk to another party? And I'll give you an example. So at NI, we were processing credit cards, right? And anytime you have credit cards on your systems, you're subject to PCI compliance, which means that there's a whole bunch of PCI data security standards that you have to follow. Not only that, but if you get breached and those credit cards go away, that's a pretty big liability for the company, right? So what we've done is we've taken a tokenization approach. We take those credit cards, they don't even touch our systems, we farm them out someplace else. We've transferred the risk from National Instruments. We still have the ability to process those credit cards, but we've transferred the risk and the liability associated with those to another party. Now the third question when evaluating the risk is the risk reducible? Is there some sort of mitigation that could be put in place to reduce the impact or likelihood? And this is where we get into patching, and this is where we get into web application firewalls and things like that. Can we put a mitigation in place to make this risk less likely to happen or the impact less if it does? So here's a little chart on determining that response. You have your acceptable, your transferable, and your reducible. And if the answer is no to all three, the action here is don't engage in this. Avoid the risk. If you can't accept it, you can't transfer it, and you can't reduce the risk, don't do it, right? If the answer is it is acceptable, it is transferable, and it is reducible, then our action is we can choose. We can balance the three. We can optimize. We can choose the least cost approach, right? So we have options. So when you're trying to figure out with each of your risks what to do with them, your answers are here. Now, risk management is not a process for avoiding risk, right? We want to have risk in our environment. We just want to make educated decisions about those risks. The aim of risk management is not to eliminate risk, but we want to manage the risks involved in business activities, and we want to maximize the opportunities and minimize the adverse effects. Risk management is about making informed decisions. Now, it's not the management of insurable risks. Insurance is transferring risks. Lots of different things that risk management should be. It needs to support the business. It needs to support effective use of our resources, allow us to quickly grasp new opportunities, right? Help us focus our internal audit programs and reassure stakeholders. It needs to create value. It needs to be tailored to you guys. Now, risk management is a cyclical process. And what this means is you start off at the top here, where it says that we identify, characterize, and assess threats. That's step one. We have to figure out what's there. Step two, we assess the vulnerability of our assets to those threats. So if I have a Windows O day, but my entire environment is Linux, it doesn't matter, right? That O day can hit my servers all day long, and it's not going to affect it. So we assess the vulnerability. The third piece is determining the risk. So now that we know what's out there and how it affects us, now we can determine what's the likelihood of this happening and what's the impact to us if it does. Then we identify ways to reduce those risks. We plan our mitigations. And then the last piece here is we prioritize this, because each of those mitigations, each of those risks has different levels, and the mitigations are going to be different for each one. Or sometimes we can lump multiple risks together and fix them with the same thing. So we prioritize our risk reduction measures based on strategy, and we take into consideration business constraints. What is the level of effort? How much money is it going to take? How many resources do I have to do to put on this to fix it? And then once we get done with that, we start all over again. We look for new issues, plan our mitigations, right? So it's not just a one and done approach. Risk review process may depend on how lean your organizational structure is. At NI, what we've decided to do is we've decided to kind of piece it out based on our levels of management. So we have area managers. We have a Unix team manager, a Windows team manager, a network team manager. We have directors who kind of sit across all those teams. And then we have a VP who acts basically like the CTO of the organization. And what we've chosen to do is, based on the level of those risks, we assign the ability to review those risks to those individuals. So for low-level risks, my goal is these are things that our managers can sign off on. There are issues, no doubt, but they're things that on a manager level we should be able to handle. They should be able to prioritize resources, figure out how to fix that stuff. If it doesn't get fixed, it's low enough that it's probably not a big deal. If it's medium, I want my directors to see that. Not only do I want them to see it, I want them to be the ones making the decisions on that. And if it's a high-level risk, and if I tweak my formula right, the high-level risk should be such a small number, right? And the medium-level risk should be a pretty small number, so that most of my weight falls down low. My VP now has visibility into all the key issues, all the key risks in my environment. That's extremely valuable to her. And that's something that she didn't have before this, right? Now, we also use the same kind of strategy when we're reviewing our risks. We said this is cyclical. What that means is for low-level risks, we review them once a year. Right? We go through once a year and we say, okay, all the low-level risks, when are those? All the medium risks we do semi-annually. All the high risks we look at monthly. And what this allows you to do is to create a strategy, create a framework where you're actually reviewing those risks. You're going through, and some of those risks, they may change. Today's O day might be patched tomorrow. So we need to make sure we're going through on a regular basis and addressing those. Risk management, this the same slide we had before. Weird. All right, so how do we derive value out of this? First thing, we order it by risk level. Then we group them if mitigations are the same. So if we have multiple disaster recovery guys or multiple privileged identity management risks, we group those guys together so that we can say this one project addresses all these risks. And then we pass those things back to the different teams in our environment. And we say this project was approved by management for consideration in our next budget cycle. How cool is that? When you're being told you now have the authority to go out and fix this thing. Management has said, yes, we acknowledge this is an issue. Yes, we think it's important. Please go figure out, allocate resources, and fix this. That's awesome. That's the way it should be for security practitioners, right? So tools. There's lots of tools out there, and I kind of started sharing you, my GRC story, right? Easily $100,000 for us. They were quoting us $500,000. There's spreadsheets. There's Open FSMA. Somebody told me about that. It's not really risk management, but it could kind of fit the bill. Anybody heard of any free tools out there? Okay. So in any case, after I got turned down, not once, but twice, from multiple groups on my risk management GRC tool, I went back. And it turns out we had an old Lotus Notes database. And the Lotus Notes database was actually kind of set up to take in risks and calculate risks and things like that. And I started trying to use this kludgy thing. And quickly I found out that it wasn't flexible. I had something like 150, 200 risks that were in this thing. And I started, I asked, well, one, I couldn't modify anything myself. I had to talk to a notes admin to do it. And I talked to my notes admin and I said, hey, would you please change the formula? Instead of it being, whatever it was, I was like, will you do likelihood times impact plus impact? I wanted a weighted impact formula. And she was like, okay, I can do that. She changed the formula. But now my numbers changed. I was like, what the heck? And what I figured out is I had to open each individual risk and resave it in order for it to recalculate the value. It's a pain in the butt, right? On top of that, any changes I wanted to make, if I wanted to add a new comment field or add this piece, a reference ID or whatever, it wasn't there. I couldn't do it. That's a problem. Because when we're trying to do risk management, we need to make this flexible. We need to be able to make changes on the fly. So I started looking at all this stuff. Couldn't afford the GRC. Notes database sucks. Can't use spreadsheets and whatnot. So I ended up, I just got sick of it. I said, hey, I have some experience with PHP and some experience with MySQL. And I said, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to start writing something. And so that's exactly what I did. I wrote something called Simple Risk. And I started writing this back in March. And I released the first version of it in April at B-Sides Austin conference. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys the Simple Risk tool that I've written. Simple Risk is free. It is open source. And it is available for all you guys. So what I've done here is I've already installed it. I have a guide right there for installing Simple Risk on an Ubuntu server. I got this guy up and running in less than 10 minutes. It might take you a half hour, maybe an hour, depending on how familiar you are with it. But this is Simple Risk. To start with, you have a username and a password. Default is admin. Awesome, I know. And the first thing that you see when you go in here is your reports. So I don't have a lot of stuff submitted. I think I have one risk and it's currently closed. So you can see open risk is 0. But normally you'd have some nice pretty graphs here. You'd see little pie charts about the stuff in your environment. Now let's go through, let's start with configure, because I think this is important, because it illustrates everything that I've just said. Now if you go in here, the first thing we see is risk formula, right? And we can see our risk formula is likelihood times impact. But what I've built in here is 4 other formulas that you can use for risk management. And again, it's PHP, so you can actually modify this. You can create your own formulas if you'd like. In this case, I've had weighted impact, weighted likelihood, and double weighted impact and double weighted likelihood. Those are probably the most common things that you would use. Now, you're able to go through, you're able to change your formula. You're able to change what you consider to be high, medium, and low level risks. This is based on CBSS scoring, what their defaults are. You can configure review settings. So like I said, low level risks every year, medium level risks every 180 days, in this case high every 90 days, right? But this is customizable. All of my values, teams, categories, technologies, they're all configurable. User management, so you can actually assign users to different teams. You can create different responsibilities for users, who's able to submit risks, who can modify, who can review what levels of risks. You can change my naming conventions, and it keeps a full-on audit trail. So every activity within the system is logged in the system here. Now let's go to our risk management tab, and this is where you submit your risks. And I've tried, like the name says, I've tried to make this as simple as possible for you guys. Step one, submit the risks. So we go through here, and risk number one, what's a good risk? Tornado in Austin, missiles, LASCON. All right, that'd be sad. We select our location, in this case it's Austin, Texas. Our category is probably environmental resilience. We can choose our team. We can create a new team. In this case, we're going to choose InfoSec. We can choose our technology. I'm just going to select all. If you have multiple users in the system and you can add new users, you can select an owner and a manager. You can choose a risk scoring method. So I have the classic risk scoring method, which you saw. I also have CVSS scoring, which is pretty common. I'm going to be adding some other risk scoring methods in here in the near future. CVSS scoring is slightly different, but I've added some help stuff on the bottom. So if you want to figure out attack vector and what local or adjacent or network means, it's got some text there to help you around with that. So you can choose your different categories. I'm just going through and selecting some random stuff right now to keep us moving. We hit submit. It'll save that. We can give it a risk assessment. This would be bad. We can create additional notes, and then we hit submit. It tells us a risk is submitted successfully, and brings us right back to submit more risks. Our next step is plan mitigations. So we go here, and in this view, it'll show us every single mitigation, or every single risk that doesn't have a mitigation plan for it. So it shows us our new risk. We can see mitigation plan no, so let's click that, and now we can plan it. So in this case, this is something that we want to mitigate. Effort would be considerable. We can put a solution in there, and then we submit. Now if we go back to our mitigation view, you can see that there's nothing there. We've successfully planned our mitigation. Now we perform our management reviews. And again, based on what you've set up, different people can perform this type of review. This comes in at medium level risk. So we click on no, we get our review, we want to approve this risk. Our next step is to consider it for a project. We can put some comments there if we want, and we submit. Gone. Now that risk is no longer required to be reviewed. So our next step, we want to prioritize for project planning. You can create a new risk. In this case, let's call it LASCON DR as our project. And now we have a new tab in here for LASCON DR. Because we said we want to consider this risk for a project, it sits here in our unassigned risk. We can drag and drop that guy into the LASCON DR bucket and save that project out. And now, every time we go in here, we can see our LASCON DR product encompasses these risks. We can also prioritize, so if I want my LASCON DR to be more important or show first over my hot site, I can do that. And now every time I go to this page, that will change. Now the last step is how often we review these risks. So in this case, I only have one risk, which makes for kind of a sucky demo, but we can review those risks. So if we go into here, it's going to take whatever time frames I've plugged in there, and it's going to calculate based on that risk level when my next review date is. So in this case, my medium level risk is every 180 days. So we add 180 days to today, and we get that this next review date for this risk is April 2014, right? So now we have a whole framework where we can go, we can submit our risks, we can plan our mitigations, we can perform our management reviews, we can prioritize for our planning, and we can review them on a regular basis. We also have the ability to go in here and do some reporting, and we can see what are the open risks that are assigned to me. What are the open risks ordered by risk level? Actually, let's see if I can. So I have, if you go to demo.simplerisk.org. I have a demo site set up. Username is user, password is user. And just so that you can see how pretty these charts are. There you go. So that's what it looks like when you have a lot of stuff. And I got lots of people going through here and submitting risks. We can see the risks that are assigned to me as the user. We can order them by risk level. Pro tip here, all of these columns are actually searchable. So if you want to sort them by ID instead, you just click it. If you want to sort by subject, you just click it. If you want to see what's not management reviewed, you just click it. So that's pretty cool. All right. So you've seen simple risk. What do you think? Cool? Yeah? All right. So, being security practitioners, I think you guys will appreciate that Simple Risk was designed with security in mind. Parameterized database queries, a la OWASP, input validation, HTML output encoding, hash passwords. It's capable of doing end-tier architecture, so you can have a separate database and app tier, full audit trail, not only in the configure section for the admin, but each individual risk keeps track of its own audit trail. It's free. It is open source, Mozilla Public License 2.0, which basically means if you want to take my work and sell it, you can. Like I said earlier, I got a LAMP installation guide, so if you want to run Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, you can have this up and running in less than an hour. And if you want Simple Risk, if you like what you see here, but you're like, Josh, I don't know PHP, I don't know these MySQLs things, I have hostedrisk.com. I don't want to spend any more time on that, but we provide all the infrastructure. It handles all the patching and the updates and everything else, right? So if you're not technical or you don't want to support those things, I can take care of that stuff for you. Yeah, we talked about LASCON. So with that is Simple Risk. I have stickers up here if anybody would like a Simple Risk sticker. I have some cards as well if you want to get in touch with me or whatever. But are there questions? Do you guys want to know more? Do you want to see more? What do you guys want? Yeah, Claire.
John, you may have said this. I was busy tweeting, so I didn't catch every word. But is there a reporting mechanism?
Reporting mechanism. So we do have the reporting under here. We have our risk dashboard. We have multiple different views. So if you want to see all my open risk, all risk considered for projects, things like that, we do have the ability to see those. There is no reporting output mechanism, but I was talking with my buddy Nate earlier, who's actually using Simple Risk in his environment, and one of the requests that he has is kind of an export to PDF form. And so I think that that's something that's interesting. I think that would be cool to be able to like email an exec, here's a PDF, here's all your risk, here's the mitigation that we'd like to do, what do you think kind of thing. So I think that we're going to do more of that stuff. I've got a few other pieces of functionality that I want to build in there. I have a couple of modules here too that I do charge for more enterprise functionality. There's an Active Directory authentication, and there's a team-based separation where it actually takes each team and silos them off so that they can only see the risk for the teams they're assigned to. But I'm charging next to nothing for those things too. It's just something to help make the wife happy, really. But yeah, I think reporting is something I'm spending a lot more time on these days, and I do plan on building quite a bit more into the tool. Other questions? Yes.
So I think this is great for managing your risks. Once you know what your risks are, you put them in there. Do you think you need some sort of interface to your methodology for actually coming up with the risks? So in the beginning, you somehow need to have a structured approach to thinking about, what are my threats, what are my vulnerabilities, how does that result in the risk, and then I can go and describe the risk and put it in the database.
Yeah.
But there needs to be some, feedback loop
Absolutely.
to the origin of the risk.
So the question is, how do we provide more structure in terms of the risk intake process? And one of the other challenges with this lowest notes database that we had is that our options were to lock it down to specific people, right? Because these are risks after all, or make it wide open. And we couldn't really make it wide open, so we choose to lock it down. But then the question came, well, who do we allow to see this? Should my Unix admin see the network team risk, right? And ultimately, the decision that I kind of made is No, we don't want that. So what we had is the individual team managers who were able to see this, but now even the manager of that team can see the other team's risk, right? So there ends up being kind of this problem there, and I couldn't give the individual contributors, the people who actually hold these risks right now, I couldn't give them access to submit into this database without giving them the access to view into the database, and that's a problem. So the thing that I wanted to do with simple risk is I wanted to kind of create that framework where anybody could really go and submit a risk, right? So I have in here the ability to lock down for each individual user. You can define what they're able to do. I can say that all the other users in my environment, all they're able to do is submit risks, right? Which means that they can go in and they can self-assess. They can go in and they can enter their own risks into the system. And then me as the security practitioner, I can have access to the whole thing, and I can help guide them down that process. My directors and my VP have access to the whole thing, so they can see the whole thing. But each individual contributor can contribute their own risks. They see we have the team-based separation extra, so we're able to only see the risks within those teams. And it becomes kind of this, there's the silo, right? Each team kind of has their own walls up, but at the same time, management kind of knocks down those walls and they have visibility into everything, right? Does that kind of answer your question a little bit? So the idea is push towards the self-intake. Allow them to submit their own risks, and then as a security professional, you kind of have to guide them. If you find other risks in the environment through your tools or whatever, you can do that. But the idea is really convince them to self-identify. Because if you can get them bought in, like I said earlier, on that CYOA approach, they're going to submit lots of risks. Your job is going to be how to filter through this.
But don't you need to give them some guidance too on how to, identify and document the risks in a fashion that not every department uses a completely different methodology to?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this doesn't completely abstract the security practitioner, right? It just provides a framework for you to work with them through. And if the idea is, hey, I want them to submit their risk, but then I sit down and I schedule a meeting to talk about that, that's cool, right? We can do that. Okay?
So how does simple risk relate to the standards and laws, the compliance type things like Sarbanes-Oxley and things like that? Is there any relationship? Does it help with that? Or what's that?
So the question is, does simple risk relate to any sort of standards or laws like SOX? Yes and no. I mean, to my knowledge, there is no SOX requirement that you stand up a risk assessment program. I don't think PCI says that you have to have a risk assessment program. They basically say you have to do, scan your environment via a tool or a QSA, once a year or once every quarter, right? So it's not going to do that. But what it does do is it creates a structure, a structured format for you to go to submit any issues that you do find via those processes and actually go back through and follow through with mitigation and make sure that management is aware of those issues. But as far as I know, there's no requirement in really any of those that you have to disclose to the assessors, here's my risk. It may help with things like SAS 70 or something like that if you have to disclose to customers those kind of things. GLBA, yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Does your risk appetite drive your security policies, standards, and procedures?
Very much so. Yeah. So the question is, at National Instruments, does our risk appetite drive the policies and procedures and things like that? And I could probably go into we could probably talk for an hour about how NI's culture has influenced our security program. I mean, they're very engineering oriented. We have a lot of, I tell him I'm going to talk for an hour and he holds up the 2-minute sign. We have a very open culture, and so locking down desktops, removing admin privileges and things like that just aren't an option. So absolutely, culture has definitely driven, kind of what I'm able to do and how I'm able to do it, for sure. Anything else? Cool. Thank you, guys. Business cards and stickers if you want.